Gavin Newsom recently passed legislation to increase the minimum wage for fast food restaurants in California. Here's another example of how leftist policies create the antithesis of what they are sold as. Now, when you listen to him and the justification for passing the legislation, Newsom looks at the camera and lies, in my opinion, and says, hey, we're doing this because we want a living wage. We're trying to help the middle class. We're trying to help the poorer classes. But what happened? Well, recently Arby's, who is a fast food chain here in California with a smaller margin of profit than, say, McDonald's or the larger, more successful franchises, was forced to close their doors. Why? Because they can't substantiate that increase in their product line, right? So what does that do? It does exactly what the lefts always say that they don't want to do, right? Concentrate the wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer people, right? All you hear from leftists is the 1%, the 1%, the 1%, the 1%, but all of their policies aid and help the 1%. They always crush the middle classes and the lower classes, right? You have franchises now forced to lay off people, which increases unemployment. Oh yeah, that's a byproduct of minimum wage hikes, okay? Not only that, but the people who are employed, their hours are cut back because they can't afford to pay them the increase in the wage and their benefits. So instead of 40 hours, they're getting 30, okay? In addition, those price hikes are now passed down the ladder to the consumer. Well, statistically speaking, demographically speaking, who eats fast food the most? Well, it's the poor and the middle class. So who foots the bill? The poor and the middle class. That's who has to pay for that price increase, right? So here again is yet another example of leftist double talk. They'd say things like, we're for the middle class, we're for the poor, we're for this, we're for that. But when you look at their policies everywhere in the history of the world, without exception, they devastate the middle class. They devastate the poor. They prop up the wealthy. They substantiate and support the wealthy. This is classic double talk, like the Affordable Care Act. Notice how the name is exactly the opposite of what it actually is. The Affordable Care Act was the most expensive piece of legislation in the history of our country, right? The Anti-Inflationary Act, recently passed by Joe Biden. It's a spending bill. What does spending do? It increases inflation. Name, result, opposites. It's always like this. When the leftists talk about policies, you can take it to the bank that exactly what they say is the exact opposite of what they do. Exactly what they promise is exactly the opposite of the result. What is practiced on the inside of the building is never what's advertised on the outside.